After living in Thailand, I finally get why Americans move to Mexico instead. For years, Thailand was one of the top countries Americans dreamed of moving to. But lately, more expats are skipping Southeast Asia entirely and choosing Mexico instead. Using data from the Earthawaits, Numbeo, and livingcost.org, we uncovered the hidden reasons Americans struggle to stay in Thailand long term and why so many eventually choose Mexico instead. Watch until the end to understand why Mexico is quietly replacing Thailand as the top choice. The first few months in Thailand can feel like you accidentally unlocked a cheat code for life. For many Americans, landing in Thailand feels less like moving abroad and more like escaping a system that had been draining them for years. The moment they arrive, everyday life suddenly becomes lighter, cheaper, easier, and strangely exciting again. A simple apartment in cities like Bangkok or Chiang Mai can cost a fraction of what they paid back home. Street food that tastes incredible costs less than a coffee in the US laundry gets done for you. Transportation is cheap. Even going out regularly no longer feels financially stressful. And then there's the lifestyle itself. In America, many people spend years trapped in routines built around work, traffic, bills, and exhaustion. But in Thailand, the days suddenly feel open. You can finish work and still grab night market food, get a massage, meet travelers from around the world, or take a weekend flight to an island without destroying your budget. Life feels spontaneous again. Every street feels alive with movement, music, lights, and energy. The tropical atmosphere adds another layer to the experience. The warm air, palm trees, beach towns, late-night cafes, and constant sunshine create the feeling that you're permanently on vacation. Even ordinary errands feel different when they happen under neon lights, beside street vendors, and motorbikes weaving through crowded roads. But more than anything, Thailand feels convenient. Food delivery arrives fast. Condos come fully furnished. Affordable services are everywhere. Daily friction disappears in ways many Americans didn't realize were exhausting them back home. And that's why so many expats say the exact same thing after arriving. Thailand feels like freedom when you first arrive, at least in the beginning. Stick around as we start with the mistakes Americans make living in Thailand. The biggest mistake many Americans make in Thailand is assuming the vacation feeling will last forever. At first, life in Thailand feels almost too good to be real. Every day feels spontaneous. You wake up late, grab iced coffee from a cafe downstairs, order cheap delivery at midnight, and tell yourself you finally escaped the exhausting grind back home. And honestly, during the first few months, it feels incredible. But slowly, something begins to change. A lot of expats fall into a lifestyle that works perfectly for short trips, but becomes unstable long term. Since food is so affordable, many people stop cooking entirely. Every meal becomes takeout, street food, restaurants, or late night delivery. At first, it feels like luxury. Why cook when amazing meals cost only a few dollars? But over time, constant eating out starts creating problems people didn't expect. Less structure, unhealthy habits, irregular schedules, and spending that slowly creeps higher each month. Then comes the bigger issue: no routine. Back home, routines often feel boring. In Thailand, people intentionally escape them. Days blur together. Sleep schedules shift. Weekends never really end. Some expats start living in a permanent travel mode, always chasing the next cafe, island trip, nightlife experience, or social gathering. The excitement becomes addictive because Thailand constantly offers stimulation everywhere you look, but a short-term mindset eventually catches up with people. Instead of building stability, many expats unconsciously continue living like temporary visitors, even after years abroad. They delay learning the language, avoid long-term planning, and structure life around comfort and entertainment instead of sustainability. Without realizing it, They create lives that feel exciting on the surface, but surprisingly empty underneath. And that's the hidden problem many Americans eventually discover. What feels exciting for a few months eventually becomes difficult to sustain, because eventually people stop asking themselves, how cheap is this lifestyle? And start asking something much harder. Can I actually build a real life here long term? At some point, many Americans in Thailand realize they didn't actually build a life. They built a discount version of one. In the beginning, the low cost of living feels revolutionary. Rent is cheaper, food is cheaper, transportation is cheaper. Compared to life in the US, it feels like financial pressure suddenly disappears overnight. So naturally, many expats make decisions based almost entirely on one thing: how inexpensive everything feels. But that mindset slowly creates problems. A lot of Americans move abroad chasing cheaper living, not sustainable living. At first, saving money feels easy, but over time, lifestyle inflation quietly takes over. People upgrade condos because they're still affordable. They eat out constantly because meals seem cheap compared to back home. Weekend trips become normal. Daily massages, cafes, nightlife, food delivery, and convenient spending slowly become part of everyday life. Individually, none of it feels expensive. Together, though, it adds up fast. And because Thailand feels inexpensive relative to the US, many expats stop paying close attention to long-term financial planning altogether. Some delay investing. Others stop building careers seriously. Many assume they'll figure things out later because their monthly expenses are lower than before. But lower expenses don't automatically create stability. That's the trap. Some expats spend years optimizing for cheapness instead of building foundations that actually last: strong relationships, long-term income, retirement plans, healthcare security, or a deeper sense of purpose outside consumption and comfort. Life becomes centered around maintaining affordability rather than creating permanence. And eventually the emotional side catches up too, because when your entire lifestyle is built around things being cheap, any increase in costs suddenly feels threatening. Visa changes, rising rents, inflation, or currency shifts start creating anxiety people never expected to feel in paradise. That's when many Americans begin rethinking everything. Not because Thailand is bad, but because they slowly realize there's a huge difference between living somewhere cheaply and building a life somewhere sustainably. Keep watching as we find out why some people start to look at Mexico as an alternative choice. For many Americans living in Thailand, the moment they start seriously considering Mexico usually happens after the excitement of expat life begins wearing off. At first, Thailand feels more exotic, more adventurous, more different, and that difference is exactly what attracts people in the beginning. But after several years abroad, priorities quietly start changing, because eventually reality enters the picture. Family members get older, friends back home have kids, emergencies happen, holidays start feeling emotionally complicated, and suddenly living halfway across the world no longer feels as simple as it once did. That's where Mexico starts becoming incredibly appealing. The biggest difference is proximity to the United States. From Mexico, many Americans can visit family with a short, direct flight instead of enduring exhausting 20-hour travel days across multiple continents. Seeing parents, attending weddings, handling emergencies, or simply going home for a week suddenly becomes realistic again instead of feeling like a major international operation. Then there's the time zone issue, which sounds small until you actually live through it. In Thailand, Americans often wake up when friends and family back home are asleep. Work calls happen late at night. Conversations become harder to maintain naturally. Over time, that distance creates emotional separation people don't fully notice at first. but Mexico operates in similar or overlapping time zones with the US, which makes remote work, communication, and relationships feel dramatically easier to sustain long term. And culturally, Mexico feels more familiar to many Americans than they expected. There's already deep cultural overlap between the two countries through food, media, sports, language exposure, tourism, and daily life. Americans often feel less socially disconnected there. The adjustment feels smaller. Life abroad begins feeling less like constant adaptation and more like a realistic extension of home. And that's the major shift many long-term expats eventually experience. Over time, practicality starts mattering more than novelty, because after years abroad, most people stop chasing the most exciting life possible. They start chasing the life they can realistically maintain for decades. Make sure to watch all the way through. You won't believe what we found to be the more crucial mistakes Americans commit living abroad. One of the hardest parts of living abroad isn't the culture shock. It's realizing how far away your real life actually is. For many Americans who move to Thailand, the emotional cost of distance doesn't fully appear right away. In the beginning, everything feels exciting. New food, new people, new experiences, new freedom. The constant stimulation keeps loneliness hidden for a while, but eventually the novelty fades, enough for the silence to become noticeable. And that's when many expats begin experiencing a kind of isolation they never expected. Living in Asia can feel incredibly far from home, not just geographically, but emotionally. Friends and family continue building their lives back in the United States while you slowly become detached from the small, everyday moments that keep relationships alive. Birthdays get missed. Family dinners become FaceTime calls. Friendships slowly weaken without anyone intentionally meaning for it to happen. Then there's the time zone exhaustion. Many Americans living in Thailand end up structuring their lives around opposite schedules just to stay connected. Calls with family happen late at night or early in the morning. Remote workers often take meetings at exhausting hours. Even simple communication becomes inconvenient over time. At first, it feels manageable. Years later, it starts feeling draining. And the difficult part is that none of this happens dramatically. It happens quietly. A lot of Americans don't realize how much emotional energy distance actually costs. That emotional distance slowly changes how people experience daily life abroad. Even if Thailand still feels beautiful, affordable, and exciting, some expats begin feeling emotionally untethered. They realize they've built an amazing lifestyle in a place where very few people truly know them deeply outside the expat bubble. That's why Mexico starts feeling different to many long-term Americans abroad. Not because it's necessarily cheaper, not because it's more exciting, but because it feels easier to stay connected to the people and relationships that still matter most. And over time, that emotional accessibility becomes more valuable than many expats ever expected it would. A lot of Americans move abroad believing the smartest decision is simply choosing the cheapest country possible, and on paper, Thailand often looks unbeatable. Low rent, cheap food, affordable transportation. In the beginning, it feels like winning financially for the first time in years. Many expats arrive thinking they finally cracked the code. Spend less, work less, stress less, and enjoy more freedom. But after enough time passes, people begin discovering something they didn't fully consider before moving overseas. A cheap life and a compatible life are not always the same thing. That realization usually happens slowly. At first, Americans often make decisions almost entirely around affordability. They compare countries using monthly budgets, rent prices, and restaurant costs. The lower the number, the more attractive the destination feels. But what gets overlooked is how daily life actually feels emotionally, socially, and psychologically over the long term, because eventually practical compatibility starts mattering more than savings. Some expats realize they struggle with the distance from home more than expected. Others miss familiar social norms, communication styles, or cultural comforts they once took for granted. Some grow tired of constantly feeling like outsiders. Others discover they value convenience differently once the excitement wears off. And that's where Mexico starts making more sense to many Americans. Not necessarily because it's dramatically cheaper, but because it often feels easier to integrate into long term. The culture can feel more familiar. Travel back to the US is simpler. Relationships are easier to maintain. Time zones align better. Daily life requires less constant adaptation. That doesn't mean Thailand is worse. It simply means long-term happiness depends on more than low prices. And that's the mistake many expats eventually recognize too late. The cheapest country isn't always the easiest place to build a life, because after years abroad, most people stop evaluating countries like tourists, comparing vacation costs. They start evaluating them based on something much deeper. Can I realistically see myself living here happily for the next 10 or 20 years? You'll want to see what happens. Should you chase excitement over sustainability? The lifestyle that feels thrilling at first can quietly become exhausting when there's no real direction underneath it. For many Americans living in Thailand, the early years feel like non-stop discovery. Every week brings something new. Different cafes, islands, night markets, restaurants, friendships, apartments, experiences. The endless novelty makes life feel alive again in a way many people haven't felt for years back home. And honestly, that excitement is real. Thailand constantly rewards spontaneity. You can wake up with no plans and still end up having an unforgettable day. That freedom becomes addictive because it feels like the opposite of the rigid, repetitive routines many Americans were trying to escape in the first place. But over time, some expats slowly begin drifting without realizing it. Without strong routines, long-term goals, or deeper stability, life can start feeling strangely directionless beneath the surface excitement. Days blend together. Months pass faster than expected. Some people keep chasing stimulation because slowing down forces them to confront difficult questions about purpose, relationships, and what they actually want long term. And eventually, burnout appears. Not dramatic burnout in the traditional sense, but emotional exhaustion from constantly living in motion. The nightlife loses some magic. The travel starts feeling repetitive. The excitement that once felt freeing begins requiring more effort to maintain. That's when many expats begin re-evaluating their lives abroad entirely. Eventually, people stop asking, "What's exciting?" and start asking, "What's sustainable?" And that shift changes everything. Because sustainability isn't just about money. It's about emotional stability, meaningful relationships, healthy routines, long-term goals, and building a life that still feels fulfilling after the novelty disappears. That's when I finally understood something important. People usually don't leave Thailand because they hate it. Most still love the food, the energy, the beauty, and the freedom it gave them during a certain chapter of life. But eventually, many realize they're no longer searching for the most exciting place to live. They're searching for a place where real life feels easier to sustain long term. Could that be the reason Americans leave Thailand for Mexico? The reason Americans eventually leave Thailand for Mexico isn't because one is better than the other. It's because long-term living abroad quietly reshapes what actually matters. When people first move overseas, they optimize for excitement. They chase the most interesting culture, the cheapest lifestyle, the most dramatic change from home. But over time, something shifts. Long-term living stops being about novelty and starts being about whether life is actually workable on a daily basis. That's where priorities change. Convenience matters, proximity matters, stability matters, emotional sustainability matters, and suddenly, what once felt like minor details become the difference between thriving and slowly burning out. In Thailand, the lifestyle can feel incredible at first, affordable, vibrant, endlessly stimulating. But for some Americans, the distance, time zones, and emotional separation from home start to weigh more heavily over time. In Mexico, the appeal isn't necessarily the novelty, it's the practicality. Easier travel back to the US, overlapping time zones, and a sense that life abroad can still feel connected to home in a way that is harder to maintain across the Pacific. The biggest mistake Americans make abroad is optimizing for excitement instead of long-term quality of life. Because excitement is easy to find, sustainability is harder, and eventually most people who stay abroad long-term start asking different questions. The 3 questions people should ask before moving abroad. Can I sustain this lifestyle emotionally? Can I realistically maintain this financially? Can I build real structure and community here? These questions matter far more than Instagram-worthy moments or short-term affordability, because the people who thrive abroad aren't chasing paradise, they're building sustainable lives. And that's the real shift most expats go through over time. Thailand can still be incredible. Mexico can still be incredible. But the real challenge is understanding what kind of life actually works for you long term. Because in the end, the best country isn't the cheapest or the most exciting. It's the one where your life actually holds together when the novelty wears off. If you want a deeper, more realistic view of living in Mexico long term, don't miss our other videos where we break down the day-to-day reality for expats who actually stay